Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks, an exclusive presentation of Faith Strong Today.
Well, welcome to a special, very special edition of Your Story with Melinda, because it's Christmas time and 'tis the season. I don't know if it's to be jolly, but I think it's to be maybe contemplative, to be thoughtful, to be generous. And what better person to have in the studio than the Yonge Street Mission President and CEO, Angie Draskovic, amazing woman who's going to share with me, share with you as listeners and viewers, all about giving, the spirit of giving, you know, how we should come to Christmas, the kind of posture we should have as we say, okay, here's the Christmas season. How should our hearts be? How should our minds and hearts be attuned to the needs of others around us? Angie is a pretty incredible woman, not only the president and CEO of Yonge Street Mission, located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, but she also founded and led Zoe Alliance Incorporated. Here it is, a for-profit social enterprise that equipped and empowered village-based businesses in developing nations for sustainable growth. She has had over 16 years in the telecommunications world, and she is one pretty amazing woman that is smart and wise, and we're going to learn so much from her today. So let's welcome Angie to the show. Angie, welcome.
Thank you, Melinda. It's great to be here.
And Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Did you notice everybody's going to be like, wow, it's a new tablecloth. You have
beautiful
glitter bows, and I brought it all out for you, Angie, for our Christmas special.
I feel very special. Thank you.
Well, let's start off. I want to get to your story, but I think it's because we're talking about Christmas, and it is about, you know, the spirit of giving, and I didn't want it to be about, you know, just all the fluff and everything else. I had you here because I think it's important for people to hear about the needs and how we start off or within the season to have that posture of generosity, kindness to those that are really hurting. And I guess it's just a conversation about your thoughts about that and how you kind of come into the season with that posture as well.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening actually to Christmas carols on the way here, and I think that this season, whatever people believe, kind of fosters a spirit of generosity and really actually a desire for community when you think about it. I was actually reflecting on the songs I was listening to, and so many of them were longing for community. Longing for relationship. And the more I think about that, and the more I reflect on Christmas every year, just even in the context of what the Bible has to say and what it's all about in the first place, it is really rooted in God's heart for community when you think about it. And so that giving, when you think about giving, I think about giving in the context of that actually being love overflowing into action. That's what giving is, when it's done with good intentions and the right heart.
Oh, that's beautiful. We're going to get back to that because I think I want to, you know, sort of unpack that and open that up a bit more, even as I'm working through being like a new mom with, you know, my stepkids, how I would foster that in them as a young age to look at the world through that lens, right? But let's go back because, I mean, you've done a lot in telecommunications. You're now the president and CEO of Yonge Street Mission that's been around since 1896, which you have clearly
did not found.
You're the CEO and president, not the founder of, but it's been around since 1896. I was reading through sort of the history line, through the Depression and how you've served the people of Toronto so well, and so being so present in this great city. But for you, how did it begin for you in your own faith journey, and then you ended up, you know, as president CEO of Yonge Street Mission? Because I think it's a pretty significant move, you know, for you.
Yeah, you know, it's not the logical career path, is
Right.
it? Yeah, telecommunications to social entrepreneur to YSM.
Yeah.
And people ask me that often. I think really the answer is it's been my personal journey of, you know, realizing my Ephesians 2:10, what God created, the works God created in advance for me to do. And the journey actually began in earnest while I was still in telecommunications.
Okay.
I was a kid who grew up who really never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, which I think resonates with a lot of people.
A lot of people, absolutely,
yeah, including
myself
my kids
included.
right now.
And myself included, even today.
Yeah,
and, you know.
exactly. So it was, you know, I think it was at the tail end of a very successful telecommunications career where I just really kind of fell into it, not out of any sort of intention or plan. And it was a fantastic career, but I went back after mat leave after my youngest was born and really just started praying because I knew this wasn't it. And I didn't know what it was. And so I came across that verse, and you know how it is, sometimes it actually sinks in for the first time. And I read it and I thought, okay, God, well, if you created good works in advance for me to do, and I have no clue what I want to be when I grow up, why don't you just show me and lead me into it? And that was the beginning of the journey. And that led to a series of steps, which included realizing, you know, my skill set is a sales and marketing skill set. That's how I you know, what I did in business. And so realizing that that's really an advocacy skill set when you think about it. And
I've never connected the two.
Yeah. And so,
interesting.
And that my heart was to advocate for the poor and vulnerable. And so a series of steps along the way that led me to here.
That's a very, you know, extreme world to this world. I mean, were you afraid? Was there, like, you know, I don't know if I can do this. It's going to take a lot of sacrifice, a lot of me in it. Like, what is your thinking as you're kind of going through this process to say, you know, to help? It's going to be involving my whole self and this emotions of it and the relational part of it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's a lot in that, right? That you have to
so much
do.
Well, and the great thing is, I guess you don't really know what you're getting into all at once, right? So it
Yeah.
sort of reveals itself to you step
True.
by step along the way.
True.
I don't know if I would have the courage to do it if I'd have known, but it was a really gradual step by step, a very clear sort of grace for each decision in the moment. Because leaving telecom and business, which is quite lucrative, and going into nonprofit is different.
Yeah.
It has an adjustment associated with it, and that was a gentle curve in, right? It was a step-by-step decision-making process. So first employed for organizations, and then when I started my own social enterprise, which was really a very clear calling of God on my life to do that in a very clear season of preparation. Like, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't done Zoe. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And there's much of what I learned through that experience that I'm now applying in the context of YSM in an urban industrial context. But you know, the leaping off the cliff to start Zoe wasn't the first step, right? The first step was working for another organization, doing fundraising for them. And so there was these steps that sort of prepared me along the way.
Angie, that's good. I think for myself and, you know, listeners and viewers, I think that's a good reminder that sometimes in life it is the steps. Like sometimes we want to go from A right to like M and just, you know, get there very quickly, especially for, I think, young people. It's like you come out of university and you're like, well, I want to be the VP of, you know, whatever, you know, Pixar or, you know, Apple, whatever it is. But I think that's good to be reminded of, especially listening to you, that there are steps, and sometimes you're not quite there yet, but it's building on to get you there. And like you said, before you got to YSM, this work with Zoe really has helped you, the things that you did in your position now, CEO.
Yeah.
And that's good. I think that's good for us to know that, you know, be patient sometimes in the process.
Yeah.
You know, to where, you know, I think God is leading. I mean, sometimes God doesn't just drop you into the ultimate job and, you know, vocation, but sometimes he wants you to be led through the process to learn other things.
Well, and I think it's all preparation. I
Yeah.
mean, the truth, and that's very biblical, right? You see these seasons of preparation. Fortunately, it wasn't 40 years. I'm really glad.
Thank you, Lord.
But you know, I needed it.
Yeah.
I needed it. I needed all the things that I learned along the way.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you end up now, Urban Center Toronto.
Yeah.
You know, Toronto, a wonderful, beautiful, you know, city, known all over the world. People love it. I love Toronto. And I know that in every urban center there's great need. I think when I was looking at, you know, stats numbers on the YSM website, I was a little shocked because the numbers for Toronto, so you're saying about Toronto proper is about 2.5 million people.
Right.
The numbers I saw, and I want to talk about this because I think as we kind of lead into, you know, that spirit of generosity that we talked about earlier in the show, you know, on the website it says 500,000 people in Toronto are living in poverty.
Yep.
Within poverty, and 1.5 or one paycheck away from poverty. Okay, that's astonishing considering that would be 2 million people out of 2.5 that are right on that edge or are in poverty now. That is, I think those numbers really shocked me because I don't think I thought it was that big.
Yeah.
I didn't think that, honestly, Angie, I didn't think the need was that huge.
Yeah, yeah. And it's shocking, especially in light of, I mean, one of the things I often say when I'm talking to people is, if you pay attention to the media, you'll see every other month or so some sort of global report being released that actually rates Toronto as the first, second, or third best city in the world to live in.
Yeah, I've read those.
Right.
Yeah, I've read those on, I think, Huffington Post or some other, things that, I'm online.
Right, and they have different measures and metrics that they're basing that on, but it's consistent that we're in that top stratosphere. And I was geeky enough to look up how many cities there are in the world. I was.
Okay.
There's 4,416 cities in the world.
4,416 cities in the world.
And we're 1, 2, or 3.
That's huge.
Across multiple measures. So
no idea.
We have a lot of resources here. There's globally speaking, we have the most resources. And so it's really not necessary.
So then what's the issue? How can there be that many people living in poverty in our city when it seems like that, exactly, rated top, we've got lots of resources, why would that be? Because I think that's huge. I thought, honestly, it'd be in the 50,000 or 100,000. You're talking 500,000 people.
Yeah.
And what does that define? What does poverty mean? What are they living within?
So the metric we use is low income measure after taxes.
Okay.
There's no perfect measure, but it's the one that most people seem to use. So then it creates uniformity when you talk about it. Right. And it's a good metric because it's based on family unit size and where you live and cost of living to some degree.
Okay.
To determine where the line should be.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, a family with a couple with one child, the low income measure after taxes has them having a monthly income of about $1,700. And the average rental for a one-bedroom unit in the city of Toronto is $1,100. So you do the math. Their gross is $1,743, and their rent is $1,100.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's not including, you're talking groceries, you're talking gas or bus fare or transit, you're talking everything.
They can't. So the average food bank user at the Yonge Street Mission, after they pay their housing costs, so their hard fixed housing costs every month, they've got $6.63 a day left for everything else.
Are you serious?
That's it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a different city.
Yeah.
This is not our parents' or our grandparents' immigration experience. It's when you've got that amount of money to work with, how do you work your way out of poverty? It's not a pull up your socks situation and get to it. There's a discontinuity in the structure of our society that's made it really kind of impossible without some significant changes.
So that's big because I know that, there's three sort of whys of that many people in poverty, and you've mentioned, but so the three that, we talked to before the show, because I didn't even think about that. So we just discussed this about the housing issue.
Yeah.
So, housing and rental costs in Toronto, or even to buy a home, impossible for people, right? I've been looking at that from, they always are comparing Vancouver and Toronto, and it's crazy. Mm-hmm. So you said housing is an issue, so that causes, a problem with, for finances, is that people can't afford, where they're living, or if they do, then they don't have a lot of other income left. Right. That's what you said. Yeah. There's two others. There's one that was on your website about Employment, yeah. Talk about that, because that's a big one, too. Because a lot of people would say, well, they should just get a job.
Yeah, exactly.
People that are on the street, and I've heard this. People that are on the street, people that are homeless, get a job.
Yeah.
There's tons of, quick service jobs that they could do. They could work it, and what you're saying is that's not, either feasible or that's really incorrect in saying that. And I've heard that in many conversations.
Yeah. And it's just because everything's changed. And I understand why people think that, because we have this, unless you're an Indigenous person, we all have an immigrant story in Canada, right? So we all know successful immigrant stories.
Yeah.
That's in our history and our background. So that's why people think that way. Mm-hmm. So I get that. What has changed significantly is the employment structure in Canada and in Toronto in particular. We're the income inequality capital of Canada in Toronto. And so what that means, the Toronto Board of Trade put out a report about a year and a half ago that shows that the vast majority of new jobs that are being created are part-time without benefits. So when our parents or grandparents came to Canada and they were able to get a full-time job with benefits in perhaps a unionized environment at a living wage, they were able to work hard and move forward in their lives. Well, now people are coming to Canada, or they are already in Canada and trying to find a job, and they're getting 20-hour-a-week jobs without benefits at minimum wage, which is around $12.
Wow.
And when you combine that reality with the housing cost reality, if you have not enough income and not a sufficient place to live, there's only one possible outcome, and it's not good, right? And that's what's leading to the situation that we see with homelessness.
Incredible.
Yeah.
The other point too is that you're seeing a lot of people that walk through your doors or receive your services that are from war-torn countries, mental illness. You know, that's sort of the third part of like why we exist, why we do the work that we do. Angies, are more people that have mental illness that are from this? Like, is there more, or has it always been these issues and we just never thought of it or saw it, or why that stat is so big and so high as far as the needs?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a number of factors. One is policy based. And I don't say this to slam government, because sometimes people in their best efforts make policies and they don't know the trickle-down effect 10 years later that it's going to create. But the issue being that a lot of mental health beds were closed down, a lot more outpatient services as an approach. And so then you see people moving out onto the street because the support services aren't there. And the biggest boom in homelessness you can actually see occurred right after that happened. And then you layer in the income challenges, the issues of making it so difficult to get established in Canada. That introduces trauma in the home. For example, if you were a person, to get into Canada, you actually have to have some significant qualifications sometimes, right? So if you were a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, where you came from, and you come here and you can't maybe even get the taxi driving job, and you're sitting around at home, what does that do to you? And what does that then start to do to the family? So we actually introduce trauma through the immigration experience into families that then starts to lead to breakdown. And depending on the resiliency of individuals, they can end up with mental health issues.
Wow. So many layers, eh?
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for the work that you do with YSM. I think that's so important and needed all year round, not just at Christmas. But as you are the CEO and president and you're overseeing this and you know the issues of the people in the city, I think maybe just educating me and our viewers and listeners, how do you begin to start wrapping your head around how to help practically, how to have this, spirit of generosity? Because sometimes, we say that we are, and we throw a few bucks here, or there's a crisis and we throw money here, or we're like, we want to just care for our family. That's important, and it starts at home. There's many things, but when you hear that many needs in our city, we must do something. And yet, how do we begin that journey of moving ourselves to say, I need to give, I need to do something to help?
Yeah. I think that, and I've been doing this myself, probably just in the last few months. Some new insights as I've been pondering it around reframing our thinking on giving altogether. It's not episodic. It's God's design for community when you think about it. And going all the way back to some very basic scriptures, right? All of the laws of the prophets are summed up into two, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor. The original design is a communal design, not an individualistic design. And we live in a Western society that's individualistic, so that's the challenge, and it feels countercultural. But we were meant to be in community and care for one another. And so when you think about that, and then the key word being love, and then God says, if you love me, obey my commands. So love demonstrates itself in obedience. It starts to flow through such that giving is other-centered in a community context where we're just loving one another. It's really all that simple when you think about it. And I came across a passage actually just a couple months ago. And again, you reread a passage you've read a million times and then it sticks with you, right? Yeah. But 1 Corinthians 9, verses 6 to 15, part of it is one we'll all remember. It just says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. We all know that, right? But how do you get there?
Yeah.
Right? And it's in the context of love just overflowing out of our gratitude. But it's also, and this is the interesting part that really stuck with me that I really hadn't connected with before, that this love, this giving, is a service that not only supplies needs, but also overflows and causes many expressions of thanks to God. So the idea is that our obedience in giving and providing for others in need all year round will actually cause others to see that and praise our God.
Wow. Huh.
That's what this says.
Read
right?
that again, Angie, one more time.
So giving simply flows out of love, and in God's heart and design for community, it draws those who don't know God to Him. Right? When people see us, it actually says, the scripture says in verse 13, because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will praise God for your obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with anyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of this surpassing grace God has given you. So
wow,
it really is a complete reframing.
Yeah.
It's actually just being the church. Right? Giving is just being the church.
See, that should be said everywhere, because I think we have made giving as this act, that you do. You see any give, or which isn't anything, because anybody can do that.
Yeah.
Like you just give. I mean, it's easy. It's like here's a check, here's whatever.
Yeah.
But it's what you're really saying. It's this sort of this holistic part of being in relationship with God and with one another.
Yeah.
That it flows out of you, because out of obedience and out of the gratitude of what God has given to you, you naturally just give, and people go, whoa, what's the motivation behind what she's giving? Her personhood, why? And you direct people back to, because I'm so thankful for what God has done for me.
Yeah, and so if you walk around with that sort of other-centered focus, and you're just looking for people to love on every day, and that's a lens, then it's not always money. I mean, it can be, I think actually in the context of homeless people often are uncomfortable and don't know what to do when they come across a homeless person. I mean, often it's just sitting down beside them and having a chat. That's the biggest gift you could give.
I remember when I was in New York City last year, and there was this young girl sitting there, and we were busy. I mean, we were sort of like touring a bit. Yeah. And it was like God, it's something about it. God does this to me every time. And I was compelled, and everybody was walking past, and so I said, you guys go on ahead. So I just sat down right on the sidewalk with her, and she kind of looked at me. Yeah. Pierced everywhere, crazy green, or like extreme, hardened face. And she didn't like it at first. I said, hey, just saw you. What's your name? And she kind of looked at me like, yeah. I was like, name? I said, yeah. And I said, and a real name would be great. I know you've got nicknames, but your real name. And I think it was like Angela. And we just talked. And it was really amazing. I mean, she had come from like somewhere like Idaho, or had crisscrossed over with her boyfriend, and now they're sitting there and they had no money, and they thought New York was going to be the place for them. But we sat and talked for a while, and it was really neat, because she looked at me. She goes, no one has – people have thrown money in today. She goes, but no one has ever looked at me and said, what's your name and who are you? Yeah. And she goes, you have time to meet my boyfriend. I said, well, when's he coming? She's like, oh, he'll be here in like an hour. I'm like, I can't stay for an hour. But it was really neat, because you know what, Angie, I realized they are people. And, it could have been a younger sister, a niece, a friend, and there they are. Yeah. And it was really sad and heartbreaking. She goes, it's not what I thought it would be. Yeah. Yeah. And she's nothing. And I said, well, what about your mom and dad? And she just looked at me. She goes, never. I can never go back. And didn't want to go there. She didn't want to go there, and that was fine. But so I said, you know what? Give me a hug. And that's uncomfortable for me, because she was like, filthy and stinky. But I was like, it's not about me. Gave her a big hug. We got both very teary.
Yeah.
And I said, I could buy you a meal or anything. She's like, no, I don't. She goes, actually, it's what she said. She goes, I don't need anything from you. What you did was enough just to be with me. Mm-hmm. And then I was crying. I mean, even just thinking about it, it was very emotional. And so I said, do you mind if I just say a prayer? And she goes, I knew you were religious. That's what she said to me, religious. I knew you were religious. Yeah. I said, yeah. Well, and she goes, but it's funny, you didn't, it wasn't, there was no agenda.
Yeah.
So I did a prayer for her. I put my arm around her, just prayed for her safety, for her love with her boyfriend, that he wouldn't leave her, that he would protect her, that they'd find a way to safety. Mm-hmm. And then we hugged again and I laughed. But it was one of those moments where I think that's, I think what you said is so true, is that it's easy to sometimes just throw money at them, versus spending the time to be with them.
Yeah.
And we have to see people that way, right? I mean, I think that's not even just the spirit of Christmas. That's the spirit in which I think for humanity and humankind should be with people, because they're all people that have the same loves and dreams that you do too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's heartbreaking. It's like
it is.
So as we have just a few minutes, Angie, I could talk to you forever because there's so many things. As we are in the season, that what you just said was profound. That actually really touched me. I need to process that after the show. But last thoughts as far as just your experience and what you do for people to encourage them, not just for Christmas, but for the coming years. What would you say in that, as far as the generous spirit, the other-centeredness, as we go?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that I would just say, I would encourage people to see everybody Imago Dei, made in the image of God. Try to see them the way God sees them. And then it's like when you think about the best gifts you've ever given in your life, when you go back to sort of the Christmas season, my daughter was dancing around the house because she was so excited about her gift. I was delighted because she was delighted. I don't know how much I spent on that gift. I mean, it was within my budget, but I'm not thinking about the money because I'm thinking about her delight. And in the case of this woman, Angela, that you sat and you talked with, you were thinking about her benefit and her having value as a human being. So when we give, whatever you decide to give, this season or all year round, I think it's, if we do it out of a spirit of really valuing people and recognizing 500,000 is a statistic, but they're all people.
Yeah,
Imago Dei, made in the image of God, of immense value. Let whatever people decide to give come out of that.
It's beautiful. And I think especially in this season, even for me, Angie, I think it's going to be important for me to just have some quiet time to just reflect. I think what you've really said to me is that sense of gratitude for what God has given us. And even though it's been some brutal, hard times in my own life, and many people, because they're like, how can I say gratitude? There's always things that you can say, God, thank you for. I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And out of that, as we thank Him, that sense of God, give me that, that the spirit of generosity and not only that, but the eyes to see others in the way that you do. Imago Dei. In the image of you, every single person, even though they annoy you or they're different from you, or
for sure, they're just at a different place on the road.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Because I could have been there too, based on decisions, or if I didn't have a family and community that didn't support me through it all. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I just quickly say is it's not hopeless. Like as scary as all those stats sound, we have so much wealth here. Back to where we are and an awareness of that. We have so much giftedness, and really, I think the answer, while there's systemic issues that need to be addressed around housing costs and employment and income and all that stuff, we have it within us to support one another in community. We actually have enough here. And we can't forget that. We can't get hopeless because it's too important. Yeah. Angie
Draskovic, Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you for this really heartwarming conversation. I learned a lot, and some deep things within my own heart as we go into this Christmas season that I think I need to do some business with God into. I think every one of us on our journey, needs sort of that refresher in that moment to say, okay, I need to be reminded of that again. For more information about YSM Yonge Street Mission, where can people know about you and know about the work that you do.
Yeah, just go to our website, www.ysm.ca.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, and Merry Christmas to you.
And to you. Thank you, Melinda.
Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks. Listen for new episodes every Monday and subscribe to the podcast at faithstrongtoday.com.